paintings are great, or how to world build when your game's full of worlds. Kingdom Hearts has a serious problem with world building, to which you may say, but Quid, KH is literally built around worlds, they're everywhere. To which I may say, well sure, but how does KH utilize that fine number of worlds? Let's get one thing straight right off the bat here. World building doesn't really specifically actually have a lot to do with worlds. What? Now just hold on before you bring out the pitchforks, man. To establish your world, you must find a way to make it feel lived in, to create a sense of place. In short, what do you have to do, Parappa?
I gotta believe!
Exactly. You need to make people believe in the world that you've created. Let's start with Kingdom Hearts 1. As the first game, it did a pretty good job at establishing most of what was at play in the KH universe. We learned of the existence of the Heartless and worlds, and the concepts of darkness, light, and the heart. But most importantly, we got to know Sora, Donald, and Goofy, as well as the inhabitants of quite a few worlds rather personally, the Hollow Bastion Restoration Committee being front and centre. Not only did KH1 create a strong homeworld for our hero by setting its rather long tutorial in Destiny Islands, it also threw us directly into the downright surrealism of KH by having us go through the Dive to the Heart sequence as the first thing we ever did. It was the carrot on the stick to keep us going onwards. The Dive to the Heart was the perfect codifier of that particular brand of KH X Factor. KH1 successfully made the world of Kingdom Hearts feel lived in, and gave a sense of something much bigger than what we as players had seen. The biggest way it did that was by including the Council of Villains, as well as Alice's disappearance. Another very simple way it did this was by having the short Disney Castle cutscene right at the beginning of the game, where the player finds out about the secondary plot running through the game, the first of course being Sora trying to find Riku and Kairi, and then soon following it up with Pluto, Donald and Goofy all wandering around Traverse Town. Another important way that KH1 achieved this was through having characters such as the Dalmatians, Beast, and at least half the Princesses of Heart being present, even though their homeworlds were not. This cements the feeling of interconnectivity that a crossover such as KH is supposed to have. We also saw Sora's personal relations extend beyond just Riku and Kairi as his best friends at the beginning of the game, and Tidus, Waka and Selphie as his playmates, to Donald and Goofy as his erstwhile companions, a whole host of Disney characters that he'd been affected by and had affected in turn, and a new family in Leon, Sid, Aerith and Yuffie. Are you Sora's dad, Leon? Yes, he is. Not to mention the fact that even though many worlds in KH1 follow the plots of their respective films, all of them feel organically done because not only does the main plot rear its head occasionally, Wonderland, Neverland, Monster and Agrabah, but we also get meaningful interactions between Sora and our Disney characters. We get the first turning point in the main trio's relationship, henceforth referred to as the absolute boys. No, I don't take criticism. In Disney World. And we get another towards the latter end of the game. Even Atlantica, which could probably be said to be the most unnecessary world in the game, is vitally tied to the larger mythos of the KH universe through Triton and his mysterious knowledge of the Keyblade. Overall, one of the best parts of KH1's plot is that it's never stagnant, and that's something seriously important for any form of media. Well hey, UG has a ton of crazy plot. We do not speak of the devil here, and you do well to remember that. Except for towards the end of this piece where I will be talking about it just a little bit. Do as I say and not as I do and all that jazz. Kingdom Hearts 2 consolidated on KH1 space very well in general by showing the player an entirely new corner of the KH universe, whilst also splicing it with memories of the previous game to give it that sense of continuity. In its first proper outing in the series, Twilight Town is the most fleshed out it has ever been, and we get not just one Twilight Town, but 2! Thanks, Axel. Cypher and Co may be relatively one-dimensional, but they're impressed upon the player to this day, with their different personalities serving to spice up life during Roxas' segment of the game, and shades of their potential characterization shining through. In short, they have great screen presence. Take for example Cypher agreeing to help Hayna, Pence and Olette, even though up until that moment all he's seen is him being relatively antagonistic to them. That small line makes these characters just that little bit more than one-dimensional. Or even something more simple, like seeing a flashback of Rai counting steps wrong. It's completely unnecessary, but things like that help to endear characters to players. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, it's the small things that make an impact and matter. You know? Like Pence pretending to be Rai in the aforementioned scene, or Sora when he finally wakes up and arrives in Hollow Bastion, the first real world in KH2, and reunites with the committee. This small interaction serves to show new players of the familiarity that Sora has with these characters, and for returning players, it's a good way to create some good continuity. They also help to properly establish Sora's relationships. These are the types of characters and dialogue that's seen as filler, but in reality, they do the most to create an illusion of life within the KH universe, more so than anything else. But before we delve too deep into KH2, let's segue into a much maligned and underrated part of the franchise. Chain of Memories. Why did it have to be cards? Side games are the perfect avenues to expand your world and touch on new concepts, which generally KH has no problems with. In fact, I'd say it does it quite well. Perhaps almost too well. Out of all of the KH games, I would argue that both Com and Recom have one of the best, if not the best, world building in the whole series. That's not to crap on Com. Quite the contrary, in fact. I think it has one of the best stories in the series. While the game in itself can feel pretty small in scale, and let's face it, that world design did not translate well into PS2 graphics. The development of the characters and introduction of new ones is not to be overstated. By virtue of the whole game being set in the organization's space of operations, we are forced into having a lot of contact with the villains, which is ultimately for the betterment of pretty much everything. We see plenty of villain-only cutscenes, probably the most in any KH game to date, days withstanding, by dint of it being, a game where the villains are the main cast. Not only are we as an audience party to Sora's loss of memory and ever-increasing emotional state, but we're also treated to shades of grey within the villain cast themselves. Once again, we have a villain cast with a sign trace to differentiate them. However, what we get in Com that no other game has done very well, other than Days and probably KH3, is interesting interactions between said villains. While for KH2 we have Days to let us see the deeper relations between these characters, Com provides this role for Days, and that's no easy feat for a Game Boy Advance game. We get why Naminé did what she did, and we feel for her situation. We see Loxian's bitchiness scale slide between all the different characters, which gives us a good assessment about how she feels about the different cast members. We see Axel's affably evil nature, but we also see him kill a comrade in cold blood. Jens is a manipulative dick, Marlush is a manipulative bastard. And on top of all of these interesting intersections of plot we have Lexaeus, the coup, and the very nature of Castle Oblivion itself. Com cements itself as one of the more fully realised entries in the KH series because of this attention to the story and the character beats, and it treats its cast and world with respect and care that's not always shown. With the Com loving over with for now, let's focus on why KH2 actually has pretty fun writing. Oh man, that really makes me sound like a third-rate YouTuber with fourth-rate opinions. Personally, I could gush over every tiny iota of slight detail shown in KH2 and talk at length about how it reinforces character personalities and relations built up in KH1. But I'll spare you all the fangirling and try to rein it in as much as possible, except for one thing. And that thing is Kairi's uniform. Take it away. And no, this is very much not brought up for degenerate purposes, you filthy animals. This is educational. I suppose some background could be useful here. KH2 was my first KH game, and it's certainly the one I'm most familiar with, and have practically studied. I personally consider KH2 as an all-rounded peak of the series, not just for combat, as people are wont to. I suppose this is a controversial opinion, but I hope to show you I'm not an idiot for thinking the way I do. Other reasons, sure, even though many of you will consider me wrong for this. So, Kairi's uniform is a very important bit of KH lore, and here's why. First off, a small game of spot the difference to establish some facts. Number 1. Sylvia is wearing the uniform in what I assume to be the proper way, as her tie is done up quite well and her sleeves are unrolled. Contrast to Kairi, whose sleeves are rolled up right up to her shoulders, and her tie is so unkempt it's given me unprecedented levels of PTSD from school and tie inspections. Just let me live with my short and fat tie, miss. Whatever happened to individualism? Suffice it to say, if Kairi turned up to my secondary school wearing that, she'd be sent straight home or at least given detention. So what can we surmise from this? That Kairi must be a pretty stubborn individual, and school rules don't bother her nearly as much as they do Sylphie, and she's very much still the tomboy from KH1. Don't let people tell you any different on that. And this is what I mean about gushing. I'll keep that to a minimum from now on. It's also nice to see more of Destiny Islands and different facets of Sora's life. Now we know he went to school. Hooray for world building. We own our victories no matter how small. One thing to note is that for large parts of the Disney world, both visits, KH2 is largely static in a way that's more similar to COM than KH1. This puts an immediate downer on KH2, and I can rightly understand why people used to KH1's quality felt let down by KH2. Instead of trying to improve on the level design and Disney plot, it streamlined them. I suppose it was only tradition for KH3 to take the next step and streamline all the plot. With that being said, I'd like to put forward what may be an interesting view for the KH fandom. That being that Space Paranoids is the absolute unparalleled pinnacle of the KH formula. This is the best this series has to offer. Space Paranoids and by extension Hollow Bastion work in tandem so brilliantly to create the type of gameplay experience that is solely unique to KH and cannot be found anywhere. I mean it. The Disney aspects can be found in any bog standard Disney game from the 2000s, and the KH original stuff can be found in any RPG, let alone Final Fantasy. It's the merging of the two that's KH's unique selling point. Space Paranoids isn't afraid of the world order, and neither are the devs afraid to more strongly tie their FF and KH characters to Disney. It gives a huge boost to the actual crossover aspect of KH that has gone largely missing over the past decade. Of course, the immensely funny part of this is that nothing that happens in either of these worlds is necessary, and one line of thought that I've seen parroted over time and time again in relation to many aspects of KH3 that have gone out to buy cigarettes is that because they aren't necessary, there is no reason for them to be in the game. To that I say, please watch this whole thing, because I've literally only been writing this and videoing this out of pure spite for that view, and never ever dare to say that to me again. And yet the events that occur in Space Paranoids have a tangible effect on Hollow Bastion and vice versa, and all of this back and forth eventually culminates in the highest point of the series thus far, the Battle of Hollow Bastion. A high point that if KH2 had followed KH3's philosophy with regard to original world would never have happened. I can't say anything to do this justice, so just enjoy the view. KH2 also gives us a veritable barrel of restoration community shenanigans, and I appreciate the hell out of every last one. This is personally why I enjoy KH2 more than KH1. I prefer the more familiar atmosphere of KH2 that enables this silliness to take place, and if you know me, you know how much I advocate for a healthy slice of silliness. I love it all, from Aerith feeding the MCP a disc to Leona and Cloud's utter badassery, to Tifa throwing hands with Sephiroth, her literal hands, to Merlin and Sid being dicks to each other. I love it. I love the warm feeling they give. I love how well they gel together and play off of each other on screen. I love how just by being there, they make the KH universe feel big. And I love even more that they are their own KH unique characters, and not just supplanted straight from their games with a Control V. I don't expect to change anyone's opinions on the FFKH3 fiasco. Don't get it twisted, that's not what I'm here to do. What I would like, however, is for people to realise just how valuable they are to KH. It's not always about what's necessary, and it's not about how often they show up either. If something is good and wanted, who are you to talk down at people and describe their sadness as headassery? The command menu has only been used in 2 KH games pre-KH3. FF characters have been in 5. If anything, by using a certain subset of KH fan logic, the command menu has even less justification for being in KH3. Yet here we are. Just take a second before you send your words off into the Twitter sphere, man. Rant over. And so on we venture forth to what I like to call the handheld era, a time of questionable quality for the KH fandom. This may come as a surprise to some, but 358 Days Over 2 was a bestseller, and the second most popular title in the series, I think anyway, prior to KH3 at least. To be quite honest, it really shows, especially in the fandom's younger days. But I digress. We're here to talk about worldbuilding, and this era is what started the lack of it. Days being on the DS did it no real favours other than tapping into a supremely large market and potential new customers. Seriously, everyone and their mothers had a DS. As an aside while we're on the topic, Square's business strategy of putting a KH game on every conceivable platform really was a 420 IQ move. GG. Days is possibly my favourite game out of the whole series, and I'm a staunch defender of that gameplay. But what Days lacks in grand scope, it makes up for with real emotional storytelling that doesn't pull any punches. It's sincere to the bone, something that can be said for almost every KH game, which enables them all to make a player believe in the emotions being portrayed on screen. It also compounds on KH2 by really giving us the down low on the daily lives of the organisation. Out of all the games, Days is probably the closest to the manga in terms of how the characters are portrayed. Just look at this. I rest my case. Days is super heavy on the character interaction, and honestly, KH is better off for it. This is what we need more of. This is why people still look fondly on this title, and why it stands up just as well as any other bigger game. And speaking of bigger games, oh, BBS, you could have been so much more than what the PSP let you be. Well, with that said, let's move on to BBS. Because of it being a prequel, BBS gives us all an insight into what the KH universe looked like 10 years before KH1. It's pretty interesting too. We learn of a Keyblade Warrior Academy. We see fan favourite characters in the younger years. We see Zack Fair, and I'll be completely honest, his last scene with Aqua is probably one of the best voice performances of Willa Holland's career. He might not have been a main character in any way, shape or form, but him being there and affecting the protagonist in some capacity, and vice versa, is what endears him to fans to this day, as well as properly cementing his place in the KH universe over, say, Yensid. It's called screen presence, baby. BBS is leagues above Recoded and DDD, and what helps even more so than its prequel status is the three protagonists' roots interweaving with each other, causing almost every Disney world to be related to the plot or the characters in some way. Let's just take one of the first worlds, Enchanted Dominion, for example. Maleficent is in cahoots with Xehanort. Terra's involuntary actions causes a tangible effect on the world, and when Ventus and Aqua arrive, they often have to correct that, which leads to them also having to actually partner up with Disney characters and form relationships. Castle of Dreams really seem to do this well, considering the amount of fans that have been inspired by the shenanigans that go on there. I rarely see people praise BBS for its usage of Disney characters actually mattering somewhat to the KH ones, but maybe I'm not looking in the right places. And talking about Recoded, this game has probably the single most useless premise in the entire KH saga. Damn it, Nomura. I had to open my mouth. Recoded is a damn great game though, and a very neat little standalone story, but the constant KH1 remake but not really aspect of it does make it wear on me. I don't want to put Recoded down, however. I think it's pretty essential that we have more games similar to Recoded that explore different aspects of the KH universe, with few to no strings attached. Recoded gave us the data world, which while a cool concept ended up being so relevant to KH3 because Nomura remembered that calm existed. Worldbuilding, thy name is not Recoded. For that matter, neither is it Dream Drop Distance. Imagine if it was though. I actually don't. The dream world aspect of DDD is pretty interesting, and a convenient excuse for Nomura and Co to get away with no NPCs. That's the real reason it exists, by the way. Don't ask me for proof. It just is. The Sleeping Realm could have had a lot more potential than what we ended up with, which is really Kingdom Hearts as a franchise summed up, isn't it? Missing potential TM. Why not have Balthier and his crew ride the skies alongside Jim Hawkins? Why doesn't Zidane lead a merry bunch of thieves in, say, Nottingham, or more fittingly Agrabah? Even more fittingly, King of Thieves Agrabah. Why does Rinoa never get a mention despite that KH2 Easter egg? So much for Papa Nomura remembers everything. The Twelve crossover is, however, incredibly interesting. In fact, it's pretty top tier Kingdom Hearts, especially those remixes. Similarly with Zack and Aqua, Shiki's character brought a side out of Riku that we rarely see. A side that I think is safe to say you would be hard pressed to find if he was talking to a Disney character. The Square Enix side of KH has its place, and it's to balance out the Disney by providing that slightly mature edge that appeals to the edginess in all kids, and really all of us. KH is baby's first RPG after all, so it's only fair to keep on the Bishi nonsense in a palatable way and get 'em hooked quick. However, apart from these few examples, DDD is one of the last games that I'd say really creates any sense of lived-in-ness in this franchise. Despite having a decent amount of moments that show different sides of certain characters, and including really neat concepts like Rinsler and Musketeer Mickey, nothing is really done to further facilitate these storylines. And even within DDD, we're really light on details for them, and it gets hand-waved by sleeping worlds. Far too much of the endgame is spent spewing plot twist after plot twist, hoping something will stick at the wall, all the while ruining Zedmus' character. Brilliant. As for Yuji, far too much of the game is spent spewing plot twist after plot twist, hoping something will stick at the wall, all the while ruining the few organization members who've thus far been left untainted. I'd rather one-note characters that are interesting than shit characters. Seriously, there is no simple way that Union Cross can dig itself out of the hole that it made in a decent manner. You cannot substitute a strong and interesting plot for shock value. Yuji doesn't deepen the lore, it cheapens it, and your wallet too for that matter. And then we have KH3. Welp. In a game that was thought to be a grand conclusion, there was an almost intense amount of streamlining to the point that the plot that we did get was just a basic amount of scenes necessary to end the most egregious plot threads. It was fan service, and it was what we were promised, but there was just such little else there that speaks to a KH identity. There was a lot of Disney, but Disney alone does not a KH game make. A lot of people may argue that a conclusion is not the time to be world building. Normally I'd agree, but as it stands, KH3 could only get better from including more original world-centered episodes that focused on building new links and fleshing out old ones. KH3 had some fantastic character interactions, but then it had such a stilted Yen-Sid scene that was leagues worse than its 0.2 counterpart. KH3 had some fun original story cutscenes until you realised almost none of the ones that had new information were related to KH3. For every brilliant YouTube player triangle command, it had an equal awful Terranort pwns everyone's seen. It created the first brand new full-scale original world we've seen since 2010, but limited it to a boss arena. It had the best Disney worlds we've seen since 2002, but the original worlds where we attached our love to were moth-eaten husks. KH3 is a game that started off for the fans and ended up being one for the new generation, with a smattering of just enough cutscenes at the end for Nomura to wash his hands of the saga and focus on his life's real calling, gacha. The highs of this game are incredibly high, but the lows are unbearably low, and for a decent chunk of people the good just doesn't outweigh the bad. I really hope this next saga gives Nomura some time to plan it properly from the start, and I can only hope that the 99% Disney-fied structure of KH3 was a one-off, but it remains to be seen. This has been a work in progress for longer than I care to disclose, but if Nova didn't casually rain on my parade every now and then, I never would have got it done. Thanks for unleashing this behemoth. I'd like to thank every single person who I've talked with, not just about KH, but anything on KH13 and KH Insider over the years. It's from listening and responding to everyone's views that I managed to even eke out this much. I'd especially like to thank Ozzy, Marluxia, Nova, Yuya and Queen for their passion about BBS, KH1 and COM respectively. I wouldn't be nearly as able to write this without you. I'd also like to thank Esther for being my good taste buddy. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone who's ever belittled things as being unnecessary, Twister especially. Without you, I would never have done this. You're the real MVPs.